Hello, everybody, and welcome back. So, in a sense, we've now reached the grand finale of the European portion of World War II. So, please title your notes for today The European Theater. So, for today's lesson, we're going to be focusing on the defeat of Germany, and then you'll see in our next lesson, we'll be delving into the actual island hopping campaign in the Pacific and the defeat of Japan. So, just to kind of set the stage and give us some context, we begin by looking at Africa, a region that we really haven't discussed very much since the age of imperialism. So, now don't forget, during the early acts of aggression leading into World War II, Mussolini invaded Ethiopia in 1935. Don't forget, during the age of imperialism, all of these different regions in Africa were taken over by the Western European nations. Berlin Conference, they were claiming different regions. One of the only places that wasn't conquered was Ethiopia, and in 1935, Mussolini took it over. Now, it's important to remember that during World War II, Great Britain and France had been maintaining a military presence in Africa as well. Strategically, it was really important to maintain their colonies and their resources and possessions in Africa while also fighting in Europe simultaneously. So it's strange to think, but now don't forget this is World War II, a conflict that takes place all over the world. So you'll actually see images like this, a plane flying over the pyramids of Egypt. So it's important to understand that the Suez Canal and the Mediterranean Sea were extremely important strategically in World War II for providing access to the Middle East, and I'll show you why in just a minute. Nations needed oil to maintain their war efforts. Why? Because unlike World War I in comparison, this battle is going to be taking place almost entirely through like movable weapons and vehicles, planes, tanks, and things like that. So as a result, control of Africa is going to be absolutely vital to winning the war effort. Places like Egypt and Libya and other places like that. So just to show you, this is kind of where we're at right now, heading into the European theater portion of the war. Of course, we have Great Britain. Now we have the Soviet Union on the Allied side. Egypt is controlled by the British because it's one of their colonies. So now don't forget, if we need access to the Middle East for oil, clearly we can't move through Central Europe. So where can we go? We might be able to get into the Middle East through Africa, which is why Africa is going to be so important here. Specifically, you'll see that the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, and this portion of the Mediterranean Sea provide the access point that the Allies need to get into the Middle East and get that oil. And the same thing here. So we begin today by looking at what's been called the African campaign. You'll see that there are different campaigns in the war for the different stepping stones toward defeating Germany. So the US is going to be obviously coming into World War II after Pearl Harbor, which you've learned about previously. So now Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of Great Britain's plan is to attack from Africa to open up a brand new front with Germany. If the Allies are able to take over Africa, essentially they can attack Germany and the Axis powers from all sides. They can attack from Great Britain, from the west, they can attack from Africa, from the south, and they can attack from the Soviet Union from the east to really wrap themselves around Hitler and basically attack Germany and win the war. FDR's plan is going to be similar, but he has something else that's really important that he has to accomplish. And don't forget, the United States has historically been an isolationist nation. They were terrified to get pulled into World War I. They were terrified to get pulled into World War II. So he's hoping that a quick victory in Africa will give the motivation, the momentum, the encouragement needed to get the US public on his side and get their support for World War II. So, the invasion of Africa has been codenamed Operation Torch because the Allied powers will come in as this guiding light, bringing peace and righteousness back to the world. Think of like the Statue of Liberty holding her torch up and guiding people to like this better promise of tomorrow. That's the same idea here. So this is going to be led by U.S. General David Eisenhower, who you will learn a lot about in United States history too. He is going to lead 100,000 men into Africa. Here's what's really interesting. Don't forget, Hitler breaks the non aggression pact and goes after the Soviet Union. One of his greatest mistakes, because he's so preoccupied now fighting the USSR, he's unable to dedicate the number of troops and supplies needed to fight back the Allies in Africa, and as a result, the Allies are victorious and they take Africa from Hitler. So, what I would like you to do is navigate to your chapter syllabus, and you should see a section titled The Battle of Stalingrad. Pause the video here, very quickly read over that section, and just take a couple bullet point notes on what happens during this battle. Once you finish, hit resume. So, just to recap what you read about, during the Battle of Stalingrad, one of the most infamous battles of the actual war, it's going to be important for a very specific reason. Now, don't forget, because of Operation Torch, Germany had lost access to oil in Africa. German generals were imploring Hitler over and over and over again to focus on the Caucasus Mountains north of the Middle East to get their oil from there instead. But because of Hitler's ego and his desire to defeat Stalin and the Soviet Union, he wanted to take the city of Stalingrad first. It was a really, really important city at the time, a really important industrial center for Russia, and he commits to taking it. So in November of 1942, the Germans were doing fairly well. They controlled 90% of the city, but then something happens. The same unfortunate reality that sets in for Napoleon when he makes his way into Russia. Winter sets in. And the Germans have never experienced a winter quite like the one they were experiencing in 1942, whereas the Russians were more familiar with those brutal temperatures and the cold and the roads and the actual experience of going through that. So the Soviet troops start to surround the city and they cut off the German supplies. They're putting up a much bigger resistance than the Germans are expecting, and you'll see that this is one of the reasons for their undoing. Oftentimes, the Battle of Stalingrad is seen as one of the most terrible battles of the war in terms of human cost. It was comprised of mostly bloody street fighting. Unlike a normal battle where you see two sides kind of converging and going up against each other, this is more like hit and run tactics in like an industrial setting. So imagine there were soldiers running through New York City, firing at each other and engaging in this brutal combat right out in the open. The city was virtually destroyed by bombs and munitions, and they said that the smell of death could be basically smelled from miles away because of all of the corpses in the city. Think of almost like playing a first-person shooter video game in real life in like an urban setting. That's what the Battle of Stalingrad would have truly felt like. So the German troops could have fought their way out. They could have surrendered, they could have left Russia, but Hitler sent a notice saying that he would never let the troops return home so that they can never surrender. As a result, the entire German Sixth Army, some of the best troops that Hitler had in his military, were all killed. In total, 2 million people, both military and civilian, died as a result of the Battle of Stalingrad. So the next phase of this is called the Italian campaign. So Winston Churchill argued that the easiest way to success during the war would be to attack through Italy. He called it the soft underbelly of Europe, the easiest access point to get to Hitler. So the plan was the Allies would attack from their new position in North Africa and then move up into Italy. Cut off Italy from Germany, sever the alliance between the Axis powers, and then move on to actually taking out Hitler. Just to show you this, again, the plan is the Allies are going to launch their attack from Africa, then they're going to invade Sicily, the small island below Italy, and then they're going to move on to actually going up and taking Germany out. This is really interesting. You don't have to take a note of this, but during World War II, the Allies are going to use a lot of different strategies of deception. This one's called Operation Mincemeat, so just listen to this. The invasion of Sicily was preceded by a piece of deception codenamed Operation Mincemeat. A corpse, a man named Martin, was cast adrift off the Spanish coast by British intelligence officers. Attached to the man's wrist was a suitcase carrying his identification, Major William Martin, and classified documents outlining the Allies' plan for invading Sardinia and other islands in the Mediterranean Sea. To add some spice to the ruse, love letters from Martin's fiancée, Pam, were also enclosed in the briefcase. The Allies are going to use a lot of different strategies like this to kind of throw off the Axis powers, throw off Germany, and deceive them. So, moving on to the invasion of Sicily, don't forget the plan now is to attack North Africa, then hit Sicily, take out the northern part of Italy, and then proceed on to Germany. So after taking Sicily, Mussolini was removed from power after Italy's defeat. He was basically imprisoned. So by September, the Allies had been victorious. Italy had surrendered, and all that was left to do was then move on into Germany. This is where things get kind of interesting, though. A new Italian government was actually created as the Allies were moving on to Italy within this fascist regime. So actually, Mussolini was removed by his own people, his own military offers, prior to the Allies arriving, and a new government was actually established. So they start negotiating an armistice with the Allies, basically a ceasefire, and Germany tries to step in and retake control. As all of this is happening simultaneously, Mussolini being arrested, a new government emerging, Germany trying to get involved, it just becomes total anarchy and chaos in Italy. Both the new government and the King of Italy are forced to flee, and it's just absolute madness as a result. So interestingly, after Mussolini was imprisoned, he was actually rescued from jail by Hitler and put back in charge of the northern part of Italy in what was called the Italian Socialist Republic. So I know this is really bizarre and strange, but essentially Mussolini becomes like a puppet for Hitler to control. He's a popular name that still has the support of some of the public at this point, so Hitler reasons by putting him back in power, it creates a barrier between him and the Allies that are now encroaching on Germany from the south. Interestingly, though, the Italian public become very dissatisfied with Mussolini as conditions in Italy continue to deteriorate, and he's murdered by his own citizens in April of 1945. So just to show you this on a map really quickly, the southern part of Italy will be freed from Mussolini's grip by the Allied powers after they invade from Sicily in the south, and then the new Italian Socialist Republic will be ruled by Mussolini, really controlled by Hitler in the north. So in terms of the death of Mussolini, as the Allies are marching on northern Italy, Mussolini tries to escape to Switzerland. The problem is he gets identified by his citizens. According to rumors, he was dressed as a woman, but he's still noticed, and he's shot to death. After being shot to death, kicked, punched, spit on, the body of Mussolini and the men who were traveling with him were strung up on a local gas station in Milan. There, they were basically stoned by the citizens below to the point where their bodies were unrecognizable. It's just so fascinating to think, like we learned in this course about the rise of Mussolini and these fascist governments and how nationalistic and passionate people were about them coming to power, and you see the way that they end. It's really a testament to what fascism does to a country. You'll notice I cut out the middle part of this image simply because it was too grotesque really to show. But you can see in the bottom image the crowd looking at the bodies of Mussolini and his men, and you can see their legs suspended from a gas station on top. So same as before, I'd like you to navigate to your chapter syllabus and do the same thing. Read over the section labeled the D-Day invasion, such an important topic, and just take a couple quick bullet point notes on the specifics of what happens. Once you finish, resume this video. So during the D-Day invasion, we're going to see an operation called Operation Overlord, the final push against Germany and Hitler. So the Allies launched their naval invasion from Great Britain onto the beaches of France, the beaches of Normandy to be specific. So they fight past underwater mines, barbed wire, machine gun fire, some of the most dramatic images in terms of warfare that we've talked about this year, the scene of so many war movies that you've likely seen or will see in the future. And this will be the largest sea attack, amphibious attack, in the history of the world. Just take a look at this picture of the actual, or chart of the actual invasion taking place. You'll see how all of the different countries are moving into a different section, and it's actually a series of different code names. So we have Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. We have two infantries of the Americans, we have two from the British, and we have Canada as well. At the same time, paratroopers are dropping down, tanks are rolling onto the beaches. It was truly a sight to behold. This is what it would have actually looked like if you were standing there on D-Day. You can see all of the planes and aircrafts, all of the sea crafts, all of the tanks moving onto the beach, and the men. These are the soldiers emerging from the ships and storming the beaches, and you can see the same thing here. Going back to the idea of deception, we talked about Operation Mincemeat briefly. Many people actually don't know this, but the Allies also employed something else called the Ghost Army. So, in an effort to deceive Hitler and the Axis powers, the Allies actually created phony or fake military equipment, planes, tanks, horses, basically to make it seem as though they had more equipment in certain regions than they actually did. And these illusions were used in several different battles. So you can see here that this is a balloon tank. Here we have a balloon plane. And here you're seeing another balloon vehicle. I know this looks ridiculous, but from the air, if you're actually looking at like satellite imagery, it looks as though it's like a real thing. So it strategically can really be used to your advantage. To wrap up, we're going to finish by looking at the Battle of the Bulge and the defeat of Hitler. So the Allies start moving in from all sides. They're moving in from Italy in the south, Great Britain from the west, the Soviet Union from the east. Hitler is totally surrounded. At this point, Hitler is going to stage his last big push against the Allied powers. It's called the Battle of the Bulge for how he moves his forces out into enemy territory, but you'll see that ultimately Germany is defeated. Hitler is in an underground bunker, his headquarters in Berlin, as it's being bombarded and bombed by the Allied powers. It is at this time that him and his wife commit suicide before the Allies are able to arrive. And with that, Germany surrenders unconditionally. So this is really the end of the European portion of World War II. We're also going to be taking a look at the Holocaust as well as the Pacific theater, the Allies' move against Japan, coming up.